Welcome to our channel. Today, we journey back to the distant year of 1912, when humanity's most majestic vessel first cut through the waves of the Atlantic. You will hear how thousands of voices, from millionaires in tuxedos to immigrants with a single bundle on their backs, blended into the unified rhythm of an ocean voyage. We will walk its decks, peer into its luxurious lounges, descend into the throbbing engine room, and pause at the bridge where decisions were made that changed everything. Close your eyes, inhale the scent of fresh bread from the ship's bakeries, and allow this story to carry you away to a night full of mysteries and human destinies. The Titanic was part of the ambitious Olympic class project, which included three ships: the Olympic, the Titanic, and the Britannic. These vessels were built for the White Star Line Company to assert its leadership in transatlantic transportation. The decision to create such a class was made in 1907 when J. Bruce Esmé, the managing director of White Star Line, sought to surpass their competitors, the Cunard Line. Their ships, the Lusitania and the Mauretania, dominated the market due to their speed. But Ismay chose a different approach: luxury and comfort instead of a race for records. Construction of the Titanic began in March 1909 at the Holland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, Northern Ireland. This shipyard was the world's largest shipbuilding enterprise and a veritable industrial city within a city. Thousands of workers were employed here, many of whom came from local families, passing the trade down through generations. Several thousand employees worked in two shifts on the project. The ship was assembled in a massive dry dock, where the Olympic was also being built simultaneously. The workers labored in cramped conditions, amidst the clang of hammers and the roar of steam cranes, the air filled with the smell of hot metal and coal. The design was developed by Thomas Andrews, the chief designer for Harland and Wolff and the nephew of the shipyard owner. Andrews was more than just an engineer. He was a man who lived and breathed the ship. Every week, he personally toured the construction site, discussing details with the workers, from carpenters to blacksmiths. He insisted that the hull have a double bottom along its entire length and be internally divided by numerous watertight bulkheads, separating the ship into insulated compartments. This was intended to make the ship resistant to any damage. Andrews also meticulously designed the engine room layout. Two large reciprocating steam engines drove the side propellers, while a turbine powered the central propeller, ensuring a smooth ride even in a storm. The Titanic's structure reflected the best engineering ideas of the era. The hull was welded from high-quality steel supplied by local factories. But the main work was done with rivets. Thousands of them were manually driven into red-hot holes using hammers. The workers, known as riveters, competed in speed and accuracy, working at heights of several stories. Stronger rivets were used in the lower part of the hull to withstand wave pressure, while those in the upper part were better able to tolerate cold. This process required enormous coordination. One wrong strike could weaken the entire seam. The propulsion system was the heart of the ship. Two four-cylinder steam engines were powered by 24 coal-fired boilers. Coal was delivered by barges from Wales, and the stokers, mostly Irish and Scottish, shoveled fuel into the furnaces around the clock. This created a rhythmic beat, like a heart. Steam hissed as it filled the pipes, and the turbine added power to the central propeller. All of this allowed the ship to maintain a steady course, even when the wind picked up. Unexpected challenges arose during construction. A fire broke out in one of the coal bunkers. The coal self-ignited from pressure. Workers fought it with water and sand for several days, but the fire managed to damage an adjacent bulkhead. This did not stop the construction, but added stress to the schedule. Another difficulty was the weather. Belfast rains and fog slowed down the painting, and the hull had to be covered with tarpaulins. Despite this, in May 1911, the Titanic was launched. The ceremony passed without much fanfare, just a push, and the giant softly slid into the water to the applause of thousands of spectators. Months of outfitting followed, installing the masts, setting up the davits, and testing every mechanism. An interesting fact about the workforce: there were women among the builders who sewed sails and upholstery, as well as teenage boys who carried tools. The Harland and Wolff shipyard was a family business. A father might work as a blacksmith, a son as a riveter, and a daughter as a seamstress. Thomas Andrews often talked to them, asking for opinions, which was rare for the time. He even sketched the interiors himself, inspired by English country estates and French salons. The project cost was enormous, more than many palaces of the time. White Star Line took out loans to pay the shipyard, and Ismay personally traveled to London for negotiations with bankers. but everyone believed this ship would change ocean travel forever. By March 1912, the Titanic was ready for handover. It stood at the pier, gleaming with fresh paint, a white hull, black funnels, red portholes. The workers looked at their creation with pride, unaware of the immense labor invested in it. This process showcased the engineering achievements of the era, but also revealed the limits of early 20th century technology. After construction was complete, the Titanic transformed into a true floating city, where every deck was conceived as a separate world. Thomas Andrews and his team of designers focused on the Georgian era style restrained, elegant, with elements of classicism. Interiors were finished with paneling of oak, mahogany, and walnut, inlaid with mother of pearl and gold. The floors were laid with Italian marble mosaics, and the ceilings were decorated with stucco, featuring flower petals and coats of arms. Tapestries depicting maritime scenes and English landscapes covered the walls. In total, more wood was used for the interior finishing than for the construction of a medieval cathedral. Lighting was provided by over 2,000 lamps and hundreds of crystal chandeliers connected to dynamo machines in the engine room. All of this created an atmosphere where passengers could forget they were at sea. The ship was strictly divided into three classes, with separate entrances, staircases, and recreational areas. This reflected the social structure of the time. First class for the elite, second class for the middle class, and third class for workers and immigrants. Each class had its own kitchen, dining halls, and even different types of tableware, from silver cutlery in first class to earthenware in third. First class occupied the upper decks and was a true embodiment of luxury. Here was the Grand Saloon, a vast hall with a 64-meter Persian carpet, where candlelight dinners were served. Nearby was the smoking room, with leather armchairs and marble fireplaces, where men discussed business over cigars. Women preferred the veranda cafe with an ocean view, where they drank tea under potted palms. First class cabins included suites with private bathrooms, dressing rooms, and even boudoirs. The most expensive was the Royal Suite, with 12 rooms, finished with French wallpaper and equipped with a telephone to call a steward. Amenities included a heated indoor swimming pool, Turkish baths with massage tables, a hairdresser, and a library with leather-bound volumes. There was also a gymnasium with electric bicycles and rowing machines, a novelty for women. Food was served à la carte. Oysters, foie gras, caviar, followed by roasted pheasants and truffles. Wine flowed from cellars holding thousands of bottles. Second class was located on the decks below and was intended for professionals, teachers, doctors, clerks. Its interiors were simpler, but still impressive. Farnham bright lounges with white paneling and green curtains, a library with newspapers and chessboards. The cabins had bunk beds, wash basins, and electricity, a rarity for trains of the time. The dining hall resembled a university cafeteria, long tables for 8 people, where they ate soups, roast meat, puddings, and fresh bread. Amenities included a promenade deck with deck chairs and a general lounge for reading. This was middle-class comfort, where people felt respected, without the extravagance of first class. Third class occupied the lower decks, closer to the bow and stern, where the engine noise was quieter. It was designed for immigrants from Europe traveling to America for a new life. The cabins were shared for 2 to 4 people, with metal bunks and a shared wash basin in the corridor. The walls were painted white and the floors were scrubbed daily, but the conditions were better than on older ships: ventilation, electricity, and hot water. The general dining hall also served as a meeting room. Here they ate oatmeal, stewed meat, potatoes, and apple pie, all prepared in massive kitchens. For entertainment, there were open decks with wooden benches and even a lounge with a piano where folk melodies were played. Immigrants from Ireland, Sweden, Lebanon gathered in groups, shared stories, and rocked their children to the rhythm of the waves. Families were accommodated together, and single individuals were separated by gender. Catering varied by class, but the quality was high for everyone. In first class, a chef from France prepared recipes from Rio, with desserts by a pastry chef from Paris. In second class, British dishes focused on meat and vegetables. In third class, simple but hearty food was served, taking national taste into account. Flatbreads for the Irish, kebabs for the Lebanese. The kitchens operated around the clock, with separate cooks and dishwashers. Alcohol was served only in first and second classes. In third, it was tea and lemonade. Passenger fashion underscored the separation. In first class, men wore tailcoats and top hats, women wore corsets, long silk dresses with feathers. In second, modest suits and blouses. In third, practical clothing, sweaters, knee-length skirts, work boots. Children in first played in velvet suits. In second, in simple dresses. In third, barefoot on the deck. Animals were also divided. The elite's dogs in a special kennel on the upper deck, and cats to catch mice in the holds. Women played different roles. In first, society ladies discussing suffragism over tea. In second, wives of professionals keeping diaries. In third, immigrant mothers washing laundry in shared sinks. Children from 2-year-olds to teenagers had play areas by class, but sometimes crossed paths on the decks. This design made the Titanic unique. The ship did not just transport people, it created a world of comfort and expectations for everyone. The Titanic's crew numbered about 900 people, carefully selected by White Star Line to ensure safety and service. They were divided into deck, engine, and victualling staff, each with their own uniform and duties. Captain Edward Smith was at the helm, a 57-year-old veteran with 40 years of experience on transatlantic voyages. He joined White Star Line in 1880, rising from junior officer to commander of the Olympic. Smith was known for his calmness, and the trust of his crew sailors called him Mr. Positive. His deputies were First Officer William Murdoch, a Scot with a reputation as a strict professional; Second Officer Charles Lightoller, a 27-year-old athlete who participated in yacht races; and Third Officer Herbert Pittman, responsible for navigation. The bridge comprised 7 officers, all trained at the Royal Naval Academy. The engine department included 250 stokers and firemen, mostly Irish and Scottish. Stokers worked 6-hour shifts, shoveling coal into the furnaces, a grueling job in the heat above 40 degrees Celsius. Chief Engineer Joseph Bell from Glasgow oversaw the 2 steam engines and the turbine, while his assistants monitored the pumps and boilers. Wireless operators Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, both in their 20s, operated the Marconi station, transmitting paid telegrams for passengers. The victualling, staff stewards, maids, waiters exceeded 300 people. First-class stewards wore white gloves, polishing silver and folding towels into the shape of swans. Many were immigrants from England and Ireland, with experience in London hotels. Stewardesses, a rarity at sea, looked after the ladies, helping with luggage and hairstyles. The kitchen staff, led by French chef Charles Pépin, included cooks by class, butchers and bakers. The passengers numbered 2,200 people, 700 in first class, 700 in second, and 1,000 in third. First class was the elite of society. John Jacob Astor, 57, the wealthiest passenger, was traveling with his pregnant wife, Madeleine. They had spent their honeymoon in Egypt. Margaret Molly Brown, 44, from Colorado, was returning from Paris with furs and diamonds, known as the Unsinkable. Benjamin Guggenheim, 50, a copper magnate, was accompanied by his mistress. Isidor Strauss, the owner of Macy's, was traveling with his wife, Ida. Among them were surgeon Morris Goldsmith, opera singer Beatrice Mayers, and diplomat Archibald Butt, a friend of President Taft. They settled into their suites, discussing politics and society news. Second class was the middle layer, professionals and families. Charles Beard, a teacher from England, was taking his wife and children to Canada. A doctor from Philadelphia was traveling to a conference. Mrs. Helen Chandler, a widow, was accompanying her daughter. They planned to settle in New York. There were clerks, journalists, and clergymen here, people with reasonably priced tickets, many with books and newspapers in hand. Third class consisted of immigrants seeking a new life. Irishman John Sion Murphy, a miner from Belfast, was traveling with his wife and 5 children to Boston. The Lebanese Abbas family, silk merchants, were sailing to America to join relatives. Swedes Gustav Larsson and Carl Anderson led groups of their compatriots. Hungarian violinist Wallace was traveling with his family of musicians. Among them were orphans, sponsored by charitable organizations, and young men seeking factory work. They shared cabins, exchanging languages and recipes. The international composition reflected the migration of the era: British, Irish, Scandinavians, French, Germans, Lebanese, Syrians, Russian Jews. Passenger diaries recorded the first days. Astor wrote about a floating hotel. A Swedish immigrant about the excitement before America. Letters were sent via the wireless operators, and children drew pictures of ships. The crew registered everyone, issuing tickets with cabin numbers. The crew and passengers formed a microcosm. Officers dined with the elite. Stewards served tea. And immigrants sang on the deck. This community lived in the rhythm of the ship, unaware of what lay ahead. The Titanic's preparation for its maiden voyage began weeks before departure. White Star Line organized supplies from London and Liverpool. The ship was loaded with thousands of tons of provisions. Flour, sugar, rice, and canned goods filled the holds to the ceiling. Meat, beef, lamb, poultry hung in the cold storage rooms maintained at 0 degrees Celsius. Milk, butter, and cheese were delivered in barrels, and fruits, apples, oranges, bananas were arranged in boxes on the decks. Vegetables, potatoes, carrots, onions were stored in nets to prevent rotting from the rolling motion. For first class, delicacies were brought, the sum of the caviar in tins, truffles in baskets, and thousands of bottles of champagne and wine. The kitchen staff checked the tableware, silver for the elite, porcelain for second class, iron for third. There was enough water for a city. Drinking water, water for washing, and for the boilers. The fuel. The best Welsh coal was loaded by barges. Black piles filled the bunkers, and the stokers immediately began shoveling it into the furnaces for testing. Passenger luggage arrived by train. The elite's trunks with furs and jewelry, the middle class's baskets with books and clothing, the immigrants' bundles with tools and toys. The crew tagged every item. First class stewards helped unpack gowns, while in third class they stacked blankets. Animals were housed separately, 12 dogs in the kennel on the upper deck with bedding in a bowl, and cats in baskets near the engine room for catching mice. The mail 7,000 sacks of letters and parcel was locked in a steel safe under guard. Captain Edward Smith arrived in Southampton on April 9, 1912. He conducted an inspection, checked the compasses, maps, and lifeboats, 20 of them, each holding 15 to 18 people. The officers tested the siren, the radio station, and the lights. Mechanics started the engines, steam hissed, and the propellers churned the water. Doctors examined the crew, and stewards waxed the floors. Everything was ready for the morning of April 10th. Southampton was bustling that morning. Passengers arrived by various means. The elite in private cars from London, the middle class by train from Waterloo Station, immigrants on foot or by cart from port taverns. The journey took hours. Trains stopped at Ocean Dock, where crowds waved handkerchiefs. Tickets were checked at the office, red for first class, blue for second, green for third. First class families entered via carpeted gangway, immigrants via wooden plank. At 10 in the morning, the siren sounded. Passengers settled in, Astor with Madeline in their suite, Molly Brown in a cabin overlooking the harbor, Irish immigrants in the lower compartments. The crew took their posts, Murdoch on the bridge, stokers in the fire rooms. At noon, the Titanic slowly pulled away from the dock. The crowd on shore tens of thousands shouted, "Good luck!" and the orchestra played Rule Britannia. The ship passed to New York, which swayed from the wake workers joked about a sisterly greeting. The ship stopped in Cherbourg, France, at 6 in the evening. Lanterns lit up the pier. French and Belgians arrived, Beatrice Mayers with luggage, diplomats with briefcases. Tenders, small boats transported them across the water. Mail and cargo added weight. The orchestra played the French national anthem. At Queenstown, Ireland, at dawn on April 11th, there were green hills and fog over the bay. Irish immigrants, the Murphy and O'Brien families, sailed on tenders with baskets of potatoes and images of saints. Women crossed themselves, children waved to relatives on shore. The last letters were tossed into the mailbags. By 9 in the morning, the Titanic was at full speed, leaving Europe behind. Life aboard settled in immediately. The routine? Breakfast at 8, walks on deck, lunch at 1, tea at 4, dinner at 7, bedtime at 10. First class had balls in the lounge, second class read in the library, and third class sang on the stern. Children played with marbles and adults smoked. Wireless operators sent telegrams, all quiet. Officers logged the course. Westward, speed 21 knots. Passengers shared stories, Astor about Egypt, an immigrant about New York. The departure was smooth, and the ship carried 2,200 souls toward a new world. The Titanic departed Queenstown on April 11, 1912, and set course for New York along the standard transatlantic liner route. The path ran through the southern part of the North Atlantic, where in April, icebergs calved from Greenland were commonly encountered. Captain Edward Smith chose the route recommended by the steamship companies, from Ireland west-southwest to a turning point, then straight to New York. This shortened the journey by several hours and avoided storm zones. Officers on the bridge navigated the ship by compass and sextant, measuring their position by the stars and the sun. Wireless operators received messages from other vessels, including warnings about icebergs. The speed was maintained at 22 knots, near maximum, for coal efficiency. The engine room operated in 3 shifts. Stokers maintained boiler pressure, and oilers monitored the bearings. The water outside was calm, and the wind was light. Passengers enjoyed walks on deck, first class on the boat deck, second class on the stern, third class on the bow. During the day, the sun reflected on the waves, and at night, the sky was clear, and the stars were bright. Officers noted in the log, weather excellent, visibility good. During the day on April 14th, the radio station received several messages from other ships. The Coronia warned of ice at 42 degrees latitude. The Baltic reported large icebergs further south. The Californian reported an ice field directly ahead. Wireless operators Jack Phillips and Harold Bride were busy transmitting passenger telegrams, and some warnings reached the bridge late. Captain Smith adjusted the course slightly south, but did not reduce speed. He believed the ship's design could handle any ice. Towards the evening of April 14th, the air temperature dropped to 0, and the sea became like a mirror. First Officer William Murdoch and Sixth Officer James Moody were on watch on the bridge. Lookouts Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee stood in the crow's nest, the observation basket on the mast. They peered ahead through binoculars, but that evening there were no binoculars. The key to the optics box had been left in Southampton with the second officer, who had disembarked. The sailors relied on their eyesight. The moon was not shining, and the horizon merged with the sky. At 23:40, Fleet spotted a dark mass directly ahead. He struck the bell 3 times, the signal for object right ahead, and shouted into the phone, "Iceberg right ahead." Murdoch ordered hard starboard and turn left and full astern. The helmsman turned the wheel, and the engines began to reverse. The Titanic started to turn left, but the inertia was enormous. 37 seconds later, the starboard side grazed the iceberg. The impact was gentle. Passengers in their cabins felt a slight jolt, as if the ship had passed over mud. Ice scattered onto the deck, and first-class children gathered it in buckets. Murdoch ordered the watertight doors closed. In the engine room, water rushed into the 6 forward compartments. The stokers evacuated, and steam hissed as it was vented from the pipes. Thomas Andrews, who was aboard as the shipyard representative, descended into the hold. He saw the water rising above the double bottom. Captain Smith gathered the officer on the bridge. Andrews reported the ship would last no more than 2 hours. At that moment, none of the passengers understood what was happening. The orchestra continued to play in the lounge, and stewards served tea. Thomas Andrews descended into the hold immediately after the impact. He walked through narrow corridors where the water was already ankle deep. In the mail room, sorters tried to salvage the sacks, but water was flooding the shelves. In the 6th boiler room, stokers climbed out of the hatches, coughing from the steam. Andrews checked the bulkheads. The first 5 compartments were completely flooded. The 6th was half flooded. Water was seeping through the rivets and seams. He went up to the bridge and reported to Captain Smith, 6 compartments breached. The ship will hold out for 1.5 to 2 hours. Smith nodded and gave the order to prepare the lifeboats. At 00:05, wireless operators Phillips and Bride transmitted the first distress signal. "Require immediate assistance. Struck iceberg." A few minutes later, they added the new code SOS. The Carpathia replied, "Coming at full speed. We'll be there in 4 hours." The Californian was closer, but its wireless operator was already asleep. Captain Smith gave the order, "Women and children first." The officers dispersed across the decks. Murdoch took the starboard side, light over the port. Stewards knocked on cabins. Dress, life belts, proceed to the boat deck. First-class passengers emerged in bathrobes, thinking it was a drill. Molly Brown put a fur coat over her nightgown. John Astor asked, "May I accompany my wife?" Murdoch refused. Madeline Astor got into lifeboat number 4. There were 20 lifeboats, 16 wooden boats for 65 people, and 4 collapsible boats for 47. They were lowered manually using davits. The first boat, number 7, left at Vermont Point 40 half empty with only 28 people. Light Oler strictly enforced the rule. Only women and children. Men stood aside. On the starboard side, Murdoch allowed men if there were not enough women. Lifeboat number 1 left with 12 passengers, including Sir Cosmo Duff Gordon and his wife. In third class, the evacuation was slower. Immigrants did not understand the English commands. Stewards led them down the stairs, but the gates to the upper decks were closed. The Murphy family from Ireland lost their father in the crowd. The Lebanese woman, Abbas, carried her baby, crying in Arabic. Officers opened the gates, but time was running out. Wallace Hartley's orchestra came out onto the deck at 00:45. They played ragtime to calm the passengers. Later, they switched to hymns. Nearer, my God, to thee. The musicians stood in lifebelts, playing until the very end. By 01:15, the ship's bow had sunk by a meter. Water flooded the mail room, the holds, and the boiler rooms. Stokers vented steam from the pipes. The roar echoed across the ocean. Second-class passengers descended in an organized manner. Teacher Charles Beard helped women into the boats. In third class, panic increased. People pushed at the staircases and children cried. Lifeboat number 13 left overcrowded 70 people instead of 65. It was nearly sucked under the propeller. Lifeboat number 15 was lowered immediately after it, barely avoiding crushing number 13. By 1:55, 14 lifeboats had been lowered. Only the collapsibles and 2 on deck remained. First-class men Astor, Guggenheim, Strauss stood calmly. Edith Strauss refused to leave without her husband. "We have lived together. We will die together." The ship listed by 5 degrees. The lights in the lounges flickered. Stewards handed out life belts, but there were not enough for everyone. Passengers jumped overboard, clinging to the collapsible boats. The orchestra played to the last. Andrews walked through the first-class cabins, urging people to go upstairs. He gave his life belt to a stewardess. By 02:00 it was a.m. on April 15th, 1912. The Titanic was no longer the proud liner that had sailed from Southampton. The bow had submerged a good 10 meters, and the ship listed to port so much that deck benches began to slide toward the rails. Water had flooded not only the forward compartments, but also boiler rooms number 5 and 6. Steam vented from the pipes to avoid boiler explosions hissed into the night sky, drowning out the shouts and cries. The lights in the first-class lounges flickered more dimly. The dynamo machines in the holes were already sinking. The last electric lamps glowed a faint red like a fading sunset. On the boat deck, there was organized chaos. 14 wooden lifeboats had already left, but 2 collapsibles, A and B, were still on the roof of the officers' quarters. Second Officer Charles Lightoller, responsible for the port side, shouted, "Women and children, only women and children." He personally checked everyone boarding the boats and fired his revolver 3 times into the air when a group of men tried to force their way onto collapsible B. Boat A was lowered with difficulty. The ropes got tangled and it tilted so much that water began to spill over the sides even before it was fully launched. It ultimately floated away semi-submerged, with 30 passengers clinging to the benches. On the starboard side, First Officer William Murdoch acted differently. He allowed men to take places if no women were nearby. Thanks to this, lifeboat number 1 left with 12 passengers, including Sir Cosmo Duff Gordon and his wife, Lucy. Later, they would be accused of bribing the rowers not to return for the drowning. But at that moment, no one thought about morality. Everyone was fighting for survival. At 02:05, the forward funnel, the tallest, weighing hundreds of tons, collapsed. It crashed onto the starboard side with a deafening roar, crushing a davit and sweeping dozens of people standing at the rail into the water. The debris created a wave that pushed away lifeboat number 14, where 5th Officer Harold Lowe commanded the rowers. Lowe would later return to the icy water and rescue 4 swimmers, but at that moment he was fighting the current. By 02:10, the ship listed by 15 degrees. Third-class passengers, finally breaking free onto the upper decks, ran toward the stern. The Irish O'Brien family lost their father in the crowd by the staircase. He gave his life belt to his wife and stayed to help others. The Lebanese mother, Abbas, carried her 2-year-old daughter, crying in Arabic, but no one understood her. Stewards opened the last gates leading to the boat deck, but many immigrants were still wandering the labyrinthine lower corridors, where the water was already waist deep. Wallace Hartley's orchestra played its final tune, the hymn, Nearer, My God, to Thee. The musicians stood in their lifebelts, playing until the water reached their knees. Then they put down their instruments and stood shoulder to shoulder. Their bodies would be found later with their instruments in hand. At Road 217, a sound occurred that no one would forget. The metal of the hull cracked between the third and fourth funnels. It was not an explosion, but a slow, agonizing tear. Rivets popped out like bullets, and steel plates bent with a shriek. The bow section tore away and plunged underwater with a gurgle, taking hundreds of people with it. The stern rose almost vertically. The angle reached 70 degrees. Passengers slid down the deck, clinging to anything they could, ropes, rails, other people's hands. John Jacob Astor stood near the bridge, smoking a cigar, watching his pregnant wife Madeline sail away in lifeboat number 4. Benjamin Guggenheim put on his evening tailcoat. If we die, we shall die as gentlemen. Edith Strauss refused to get into the lifeboat without her husband. We have lived together all our lives. Thomas Andrews, the ship's architect, walked through the first-class cabins, urging people to go upstairs. He gave his life bell to a young stewardess and remained in the smoking room, staring at the clock above the fireplace. His body was never found. At 0220, the stern disappeared beneath the water. A giant vortex formed. Hundreds of people were sucked down, along with furniture, suitcases, and debris. Then came the silence. Only cries in the water, the splash of oars, and the distant rumble of the Carpathia, heading at full speed. In the lifeboats, the struggle for survival began. The water temperature was minus 2 degrees Celsius. It's 28 Celsius text F. People died of hypothermia within 15 to 20 minutes. In lifeboat number 6, Margaret Molly Brown took command. She forced the rowers to go back for swimmers and handed out her furs to freezing women. In lifeboat number 14, Harold Lowe tied 5 lifeboats together with ropes so they wouldn't get lost in the dark and return to the disaster area. He pulled out 4 men, but 2 died on the way. Collapsible B flipped upside down. 30 people clung to it, including second wireless operator Harold Bride and Charles Lightoller. They stood knee-deep in water, shouting to each other to stay awake. The Carpathia, commanded by Captain Arthur Rostron, sailed at 20 knots faster than her engines normally allowed. Rostron ordered all cabins heated, soup to be cooked, and blankets and brandy to be prepared. At 04 Saar, she arrived at the scene. The first lifeboat approached at 04:10. It was number 2 with 18 survivors. The rescued were lifted up in nets like fish. Molly Brown helped the women. Madeline Astor came aboard barefoot, clutching the hand of a stewardess. An immigrant woman from 3rd class held her dead child. Her husband had remained on the ship. By 08:30, all 705 survivors were on board. The Carpathia left the lifeboats in the water. They were too heavy to lift. The Californian arrived at 08:30, too late. Debris drifted over an area of tens of kilometers. Cork lifebelts, deck chairs, a child's doll, pages from a Bible. Bodies in lifebelts bobbed on the waves, their faces covered in frost. The Carpathia set course for New York. The wireless operator transmitted the names of the rescued. Silence reigned in the lifeboats. Many stared into the water, where their home had been so recently. When the Carpathia entered New York Harbor on April 18th in a downpour, thousands of people were already crowding the pier. Newspapermen shouted headlines: Titanic sunk, 2,500 dead, survivors aboard. Families of the rescued rushed to the gangplank while others walked away in tears, seeing names on the lists. A total of 1,517 people died, 818 passengers and 685 crew members. 60% of first-class passengers were saved, 42% of second class, and only 24% of third class. The majority of women and children survived, and the minority of men. Among the dead were Captain Smith, Thomas Andrews, John Astor, Ben Guggenheim, Ida Strauss, the 8 musicians of the orchestra, and almost the entire engine room staff. The bodies that could be recovered were taken to Halifax. 328 coffins lined up in the morgue. Many remained in the ocean. The investigation began immediately. In the USA, Senator William Smith convened a special committee on April 19th, the day after the Carpathia's arrival. Hearings were held at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. J. Bruce Ismay was the first witness. He sat pale, wearing a coat, answering quietly. He was asked why speed was not reduced despite iceberg warnings. Ismay said the decision was the captain's. Then the surviving officer testified. Lightoller defended Smith. Murdoch was already dead. Wireless operator Bride told of the signals. Stewardess Violet Jessup of the chaos in third class. The committee established that there were not enough lifeboats, warnings were ignored, and the bulkheads did not reach the upper deck. Recommendations: more lifeboats, 24-hour radio watch, and an ice patrol. In Britain, the investigation was opened by Lord Mersey in May. Hearings were held in the Scottish Hall in London. 96 witnesses testified, including Ismay and Lightoller. The British defended the White Star Line's reputation. The ship was the best in the world. But the facts were the same. 20 lifeboats for 2 hours, 200 people, 22 knots speed in an ice field. Mersey concluded the disaster was an act of God, but with human errors. The outcome was the adoption of SOLAS, the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea. Lifeboats for everyone, 24-hour radio watch, and an ice patrol with ships and aircraft. White Star Line paid compensation, £664,000 to the families of the deceased. Ismay resigned, sold his shares, and lived in Ireland until his death in 1937. The Olympic was refitted, lifeboats were added, and bulkheads were raised. The disaster changed maritime law forever. The Titanic's wreckage lay on the seabed for 73 years until September 1st, 1985, when it was found by Robert Ballard. The Franco-American expedition on the research vessel Nora used the towed vehicle Argo with video cameras and sonar. At 01:05 a.m. ship time, the screen lit up with the silhouette of a boiler, the first evidence. An hour later, Argo passed over the bow section, a jagged break, a deck covered in rust, an anchor still hanging from the chain. The coordinates were recorded: 41, Circ 43, Fryext N, 49, Circ 56, Sax, I-text, W's, depth 3,115 meters. In 1986, Ballard returned with the manned submersible Alvin. 3 people descended in a 2-meter diameter steel sphere. They saw the ship in detail. The break at the level of the third funnel, the stern torn off by 600 meters, and the propellers covered in barnacles. Alvin collected the first artifacts: a porcelain plate with the White Star Line logo, a copper bell from the bridge, and a leather suitcase. Everything was lifted in baskets to prevent damage. Videos showed the world: chandeliers in the lounge, a telephone booth on the bridge, a child's doll in the silt. Commercial expeditions began in 1987. RMS Titanic Inchstone obtained the rights to salvage items. Over 7 voyages, more than 5,500 artifacts were recovered. Coal from the bunkers, jewelry, menus, life belts, and even a 20-ton piece of the hull plating. Everything was conserved in laboratories: metal from rust, wood from decay, paper from disintegration. In 1994, an exhibition opened in Boston. Visitors saw an actual first-class door and a champagne bottle with the cork still intact. Modern research uses robots. In 2010, an expedition with high-resolution sonar created a complete 3D map of the seabed: 2 main pieces and a debris field covering 15 square kilometers. In 2023, the British company Magellan conducted a laser scan. Billions of points showed every rivet, every crack. Scientists studied corrosion. Rustical bacteria are consuming the metal at a rate of 300 kilograms per year. By 2030, the hull is predicted to collapse. Underwater robots collect DNA from objects: hair in a comb, blood on bandages. Archaeologists have found new details: a spare propeller lying in the hold, unexploded signal flares. In 2019, a private submersible descended to the stern. It is disintegrating faster than the bow due to the boiler explosions. Videos showed Captain Smith's bathtub still in place. Disputes over preservation continue. UNESCO declared the wreckage a monument in 2012. Artifact recovery is prohibited without a scientific purpose. Tourism is limited. Submersibles descend once a year, with a ticket costing $250,000. The Titanic remains the most studied shipwreck in history. Every new descent reveals details that change the understanding of that night. Immediately after the disaster, the Titanic entered newspapers, theaters, and songs. In 1912, the first silent films were released. Saved from the Titanic with Dorothy Gibson, a surviving actress, and A Night to Remember, a drama in 3 acts. Ballads were printed in the US and Britain. The Titanic sank in the ocean. Heroes of the Engine Room. Memoir books by survivors sold in large numbers. Lawrence Beasley's The Loss of the Titanic. Archibald Gracie's The Truth About the Titanic. In the 1950s, Walter Lord wrote A Night to Remember, a book that became a bestseller and the basis for the 1958 film Titanic starring Clifton Webb. In 1997, James Cameron directed Titanic, the highest grossing film of the century. Filming lasted 7 months and the budget exceeded $200 million. Cameron descended to the wreckage in the Mir 1 submersibles, studying every bolt. The reconstructed ship in Mexico was almost life-size. The bow, the boat deck, the grand staircase. Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet became icons of a generation. Celine Dion's soundtrack, My Heart Will Go On, sold 30 million copies. The film won 11 Oscars, renewed interest in the disaster, and inspired thousands of school reports. Museums opened worldwide. In Belfast in 2012, Titanic Belfast was built a 6-story building shaped like a ship's bow. The exhibition includes a replica of the grand staircase, a lifeboat launch simulator, and the sounds of the engine room. In Halifax, the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic houses original deck chairs, first-class paneling, and children's shoes. In Las Vegas, the RMS Titanic Inc. exhibition displays artifacts, coal menus, a clock stopped at 0220. In London and Paris, temporary exhibitions feature costumes from the Cameron film. Literature continued. Daniel Allen Butler's Unsinkable Molly Brown, Eric Larson's Dead Wake. Artists paint the Titanic breaking up, and sculptors cast bronze figures of the musicians. Music, Gavin Bryar's Symphony the Titanic, Maury Yeston's Broadway musical. In pop culture parodies in The Simpsons, internet memes, songs from Bob Dylan to Nightwish, the legacy in shipbuilding. After Solace, all liners received lifeboats for everyone, double hulls, and a 24-hour radio watch. Modern cruise giants, the icon of the seas, carry 20 tender boats, satellite navigation, and iceberg radar. A replica, Titanic II, is being built in China. The same design, but with modern engines and safety systems. The launch is planned for 2027. Tourism to the wreckage is limited. Ocean Gate and deep ocean expeditions. Submersibles descend 8 people per trip. In 2023, the Titan submersible imploded, 5 died. This was a reminder. The ocean does not forgive mistakes. Education. In US and UK schools, the Titanic is a subject in history, physics, and ethics. Fan communities hold conferences, build 1/48 scale models, and run forums. The Titanic has become a symbol of hubris, heroism, and class inequality. Its name is given to streets, hotels, and pubs. In Halifax, a memorial service is held annually on April 15th at the graves of 120 victims. Monuments are in Southampton, Belfast, and Washington. The disaster lives on in culture, reminding us even the unsinkable can sink. From the first days after the disaster, rumors and legends began to grow around the Titanic. New York newspaper wrote about the mummy's curse. Allegedly, a sarcophagus of an Egyptian priestess was being carried aboard, which brought misfortune. In reality, it was a wooden case with mummified remains from the British Museum, and it sank with the cargo. Another story is Morgan Robertson's novel Futility from 1898, which described the ship Titan sinking from an iceberg in April. Coincidences in names, sizes, and even the number of lifeboats gave rise to talk of foresight. Robertson claimed he was simply studying naval architecture. Conspiracy theorists blamed J. Bruce Ismay for swapping the ships. The Titanic was allegedly exchanged with the damaged Olympic for insurance purposes. There's no evidence. The numbers on the propellers and hull plating match the Titanic. The theory about the fire in the coal bunker, which started in Belfast, is also discussed. Smoldering coal could have weakened the bulkhead, but the fire was put out 3 days before departure. Astrologers pointed to the stars that night. Venus conjunct Mars, supposedly a sign of trouble. In fact, the sky was clear, but moonless poor visibility. Mystical stories appeared later. Survivors spoke of ghosts. Stewardess Violet Jessup saw Captain Smith's shadow on the Britannic in 1916. In museums, visitors hear footsteps in empty halls. In the 1970s, divers reported voices underwater actually echo from the equipment. In 1991, the Soviet submarine Kursk allegedly saw light in the Titanic's portholes. It turned out to be the reflection of lanterns. Comparisons with other disasters are inevitable. The Lusitania was torpedoed in 1915 in 18 minutes, 198 dead, but there were enough lifeboats. The Britannic, the Titanic's sister, sank in 1916 from a mine in 55 minutes. Almost everyone was saved, thanks to the lessons learned. The Costa Concordia hit reefs off Italy in 2012. The captain fled, 32 dead, but the evacuation was chaotic. The Estonia sank in a storm in 1994 in half an hour, 852 victims, due to an open bow visor. The lessons of the Titanic saved thousands of lives on these ships. Aviation also learned, after the Hindenburg crash in 1937, fire-resistant materials were introduced, just as double hulls were introduced after the Titanic. World War II took the Britannic and damaged the Olympic, but their structures held up better than expected. The Titanic remains the benchmark. Every new liner is compared to it for safety, luxury, and tragic potential.